Hi everybody, I'm Jeremy. Welcome to Livewire Review Podcast. This is Season 1, Episode 5. We're going to talk about the news, and we're going to talk a little bit about charging EVs when it comes to the power outages, and what you can do in a power outage with certain EVs on the market. Now, if you're listening to this on our Spotify channel, please go over to our YouTube page. It's at youtube.com/@LiveWireReview. We have reviews there, we have tech tips, we have interviews, and of course, this podcast video is available there. So check that out when you have some time. So we're going to be talking about a couple mechanical things today. One thing I wanted to bring up is actually how some of the technology has changed over the last decade when it comes to EVs, especially when it comes to the drive unit on EVs. If you're familiar with how some of the Teslas work, when the Tesla Model S came out, it came with something called the large drive unit. Now, that's significant today because we're starting to see those show up in the repair part of the industry. And early on in that car's life, they actually went through quite a few drive units, and it wasn't perfectly clear as to why that was happening. So that drive unit was actually cooled by coolant, and there were specific seals inside the large drive unit that would prevent the coolant from getting into where the actual motor is and where the power electronics were. Now, the problem is those seals would fail over time, and the coolant would get into the electric motor and into where the electronics are, like where the inverter is in the motor. So some aftermarket companies have come up with some neat solutions for the large drive unit. They realize that it doesn't need the amount of cooling that it has, and so they've come up with these 3D printed parts in some cases that actually direct coolant away. So they call it a coolant delete for the large drive unit in the Tesla motors. Now, another one on the market that I know uses coolant to cool it off would be the Hyundai Kona electric, like the one that we have. Now, I haven't seen any issues of coolant leaking into that motor, so I don't think there's any issues there. Maybe it's just sealed up in a totally different way. But what is unique is the fact that the 2024 Hyundai Kona electric is totally different than the 2023. Not just in its size, but also in its design. The drive unit in the new Hyundai Kona electric does not have a separate reduction gear. It is no longer two different parts. The reduction gear is now built into the electric motor. And what is also interesting is they have gone to a transmission fluid to cool this drive unit. I'm going to call it a drive unit from now on because it's just Tesla's terminology for this, and it's just the best way to describe it because it is one entire unit that drives the vehicle. So I find this very interesting because it actually makes maintenance fairly straightforward. All you have to change out is in the Hyundai products, about 3.3 liters of transmission fluid. It's a fairly straightforward process. You take out 3.3 liters, you put 3.3 liters back in, and off you go. So that means that there is a couple different parts on this drive unit that there weren't there before. Now there is a pump that pumps that fluid around the motor. And what's nice about having transmission fluid around that motor is it doesn't affect the electronics in it. So it doesn't conduct electricity. It's perfectly okay to cool that motor directly using transmission fluid. So you actually get better cooling this way. And so I'm just pretty interested to see the design changes over time. So the Ioniq 6 and the Ioniq 5, they already use transmission fluid to cool the motors, and now the Hyundai Kona electric is now in that same ballpark. You'll also find that the newer Tesla drive units are also cooled by transmission fluid. If I am correct, I think they use a Pentasyn Type 9, and they even have a filter on it. So they use indirect cooling on both of these types of motors, and that is very interesting to me. Maybe not to my listening audience, but I like to see these improvements. And now on some of the Facebook pages I've been on, I've actually seen that these drive units are lasting a lot longer than they used to. Large drive units in Tesla Model S's were changed so often that the 2 million kilometer one that I spoke about last week had 13 drive units put in it in 2 million kilometers. So it was almost one a year. That's how often they were changed out. Now I'm hearing of Tesla Model 3s. Some of them fail early around 200,000 kilometers. I can't explain why some of those do, but that's not very common. But a lot of them I've been seeing have been reaching 400 to 660,000 kilometers on the original drive unit. So the only failure points you're going to find in those in the future is the same as you would in normal transmissions today, where the actual physical bearings wear out. So you'd take apart the drive unit, you put new bearings in it, and off you go. So yeah, it's really nice to see some of these improvements along the way. So the way these work is transmission fluid is in the actual drive unit, and there is a multi-plate coolant separator. So the transmission fluid comes to one side, and then the coolant comes to the other. So that's how that indirect cooling works. And now on to the next piece of news. Actually, this really leads into the next piece. I like to talk about EV conversions because it's a new thing I've discovered that I've been doing a little bit of research on. And we talked about that Ford a couple episodes ago that had the Tesla drive unit and the battery from the Model 3 Performance put in it. And this swap is becoming a lot more common, especially with this one company in Quebec called Enginext. It's not the only place you can get this. You can also go to EV West, I believe don't quote me on this, but I think it's in California. But they actually do programming to allow you to drop these drive units into different vehicles, the batteries as well. So Enginext will actually give you modules to allow all your parts to communicate so that you can hook up a throttle pedal to the drive unit from a Tesla Model 3, for example. It's becoming a very, very popular conversion piece. The Tesla Model 3 drive units and even the large drive units from the Model S's with that coolant delete are becoming as popular as Chevy small blocks were for conversions back in the day. If you think about it, every conversion from back in the day always had a Chevy small block and a Ford 9-inch rear end. So nowadays, you can actually swap out your batteries. You can use blade-style batteries. You can use cylinder-style batteries that like what come in the Tesla products, and you can make your own project. If you look at Tim Allen's Vic project, they actually use a Tesla Model S battery, but the modules are spread across the car. They're not in a case in the way you would imagine it. They have them spread all over the car, but they have coolant pipes connecting every part of them. And they used AEM products to be able to connect those. So the EV conversion side of things is really starting to ramp up. It's not always going to be a high dollar conversion. So I've seen drop-in conversions that can fit in the space where like a Coyote mount would go. And they actually have part of the battery there. They have the motor in the back of it, and it's a complete drop-in unit. You can get about 63 to 75 kilowatt hour setup, and it actually replaces the weight that came out of the vehicle. If you look online, somebody did it recently with a S1E5 Mustang. So EV conversions are becoming super popular, and one of the most popular ways you can convert a car to an EV is using the Model 3 drivetrain. And Enginext makes that possible nowadays. So EV conversions are definitely a thing, and they're becoming just as popular as those Chevy small blocks in cars. So you're going to see a lot of those pop up. You know, I want to talk about public infrastructure too, and I don't mean charging infrastructure. I mean like rail systems. You know how we have a train, the GO train runs across and it goes to Union Station down in Toronto, just for example from where I live. And there's also a train that goes from Barrie all the way down into Toronto. But it is a very, very slow train. Other countries, unfortunately, they were torn by war, and because of that they had to rebuild. And a lot of those countries were able to rebuild using like maglev trains, so trains that actually levitate off the tracks and go something like 500 or 600 kilometers an hour. They can do a really long trip in only an hour. So I think our country and other countries out there actually need these kind of rail systems to improve public infrastructure. Like if I could get on a bullet train to go from, let's say, Sudbury all the way down to Toronto in less than an hour, that'd be amazing. There'd be so many people that would be able to get into Toronto, and you would not need your car. So parking wouldn't be an issue. Now, Toronto would just be so much busier with people, but without cars. So I really think public infrastructure needs to grow to this point. There's a few different charging points that are going to be installed soon, and one of the most interesting ones I came across is Tesla is going to be putting in a 200 stall supercharger in a place called Yeehaw Junction in Florida. It's going to be the biggest installation of superchargers out there, but I just thought it was great. The name of the town is Yeehaw Junction. And on to the next one. There's going to be another one installed at the Cartier Arena in Laval, Quebec. They're going to have only 4 units there, 24 kilowatt, 50 kilowatt, 100 kilowatt, and 200 kilowatt. So you pick the speed that you need for the time that you have. If you have a couple hours to kill, 24 kilowatts is going to be perfectly fine for you. But if you're in a hurry and want to be in and out in 20 minutes, the 200 kilowatt unit is the one you're going to want to use. So I like that flexible infrastructure that they're putting in there. The next piece is a company called Volt Post is going to be installing lamp post charging stalls. So it means any lamp post out there will be able to be converted into a level 2 charging station, which will definitely help with on-street parking in many parts of the world. So in North America, Volt Post is going to start becoming a really big thing, and it allows street side charging. There is also 100 new supercharger stalls going in New York City. If you've been paying attention to the news recently, because of some certain political actions asking taxi companies to have a lot more electric vehicles in their fleet, all of a sudden there's a whole bunch of electric cars running around New York City, and they're tying up all the fast chargers. So Tesla is going to try and alleviate some of this. They're going to be installing a 100 stall supercharger location in New York City to help alleviate these problems. So I'm glad to see more of this infrastructure going in. Now here in Canada, from January 2023 to January 2024, the number of rebates handed out for electric vehicles has gone up 130%. So that means from month to month, from last year to this year, 130% more EVs were sold than the year before. So despite the news telling you that EVs are not selling, to be fair, they're selling a lot more than you think. China is always an interesting place when it comes to the outside world looking in. We all have our own opinions of this country, but they are actually trying to improve their country using renewable energy and with electric vehicles. You would be surprised to know that China is actually selling 42 to 45% of their vehicles are electric cars. So of new car sales in China right now, 42 to 45% of their new car sales are all electric. Now, that doesn't show up in the news very often, so I was actually pretty surprised by this figure. They actually are going to beat their target of 50% electric car sales by 2030. In fact, they'll probably do it by next year. They'll probably be at 50%. So they're well ahead of what their projections are. And China has a lot of global emissions, so I'm glad to see that they are charging forward with renewable energy rather than taking that extra step that a lot of countries have had to do in the past, where they go straight from coal, gasoline, oil, and then they have to transition over to propane, natural gas, some of the cleaner gases out there, you know, like those, and then eventually transition into renewables and electric cars. They're skipping that step. They're going from the gasoline and the dirty products and the coal, and they still have to run those things. China's a very big country with a huge population, so it's going to take time to phase those things out. But it is nice to see that they are transitioning to the renewable energy as quickly as they can. 42 to 45% of new car sales, that is a really big thing, especially for a country with more than 1 billion people. So the next companies to get access to the Tesla superchargers this spring are General Motors, Volvo, and Polestar. So that'll bring up the list to be Ford, Rivian, GM, Polestar, and Volvo. Other automakers are going to follow suit, but those are the next ones to come up this spring of 2024. So keep an eye out for that. Now, Ford loves to be in the EV sector. I always see these 3 companies battling it out. Tesla, of course, Ford, and Hyundai, Kia. Those 3 companies are always going to be the top 3 in EVs, at least in my mind, because they are striving to be leaders in that space. They're always innovating and coming up with ideas. And now Ford has actually come up with a new idea. If you trade in a Tesla towards a Ford electric vehicle like a Mach-E or a Lightning, they're actually going to give you a Conquest bonus. They're going to give you $1,500 extra on your trade-in if you trade a Tesla in for a Ford electric vehicle. I love that. I love the competition between these 3. I want it to continue because if you think about Tesla's mission, it was to transition the world into sustainable energy. And they're doing that by inspiring other car companies. Even if they're inspiring those other car companies to steal their customers, it doesn't matter. It moves us all forward, and I'm all for it. And with that, it moves us on into our talk of the week. It's just going to be a light topic. It'll be about charging your electric vehicle and power outages. Now, I've talked about this last week briefly. A lot of owners on Facebook, like I've said, have been powering their homes using their electric vehicles. You know, the Rivian R1T can put out 1,500 watts. A Kia EV9, EV6, and the Ioniq 5 and the Ioniq 6 all have something called vehicle to load, and they can also output 1,700 watts of 120 volt power. So they come in really handy as a backup power bank for your home. You got to keep this in mind when you're looking at electric vehicles, is that this is quite the benefit. Personally, my next electric car has to have one of these features. Well, I would really like to see 240 volt out so that you'd be able to power a well pump in a power outage. But so far that's only available on the Ford F-150 Lightning through their Pro Power onboard system. They actually have the same twist lock that you would find on a generator. So if you have a transfer switch on your home already set up, or if you want to get one installed, all you need is that the cord from your transfer switch will plug directly into an F-150 Lightning or an F-150 Power Boost hybrid vehicle. And that feature will save a lot of people a lot of grief. Now, a lot of people laugh at EVs. There's a lot of memes out there about them being charged by generators. But you have to admire the fact that an electric vehicle can run on any fuel that you throw at it. So if you have a medium-sized generator that has 240 volt out, you should be able to charge your electric vehicle in a pinch in the event of a power outage. Because what if you have to go on a trip the next day and your power goes out? What are you supposed to do? Well, the fact is, a generator actually does come in handy for your electric vehicle. Now, you can't do it all the time, because if you charge your electric vehicle using a generator, the waveform that comes out of a generator is not clean. It's not called a pure sine wave. What comes out of the wall is a pure sine wave because it comes from a transformer, and the electronics in the car are meant to take that sine wave and break it down into DC current for the battery. Now, it can do that with a generator, but I guarantee you that it's going to generate more heat. Luckily, in an electric vehicle, the coolant pumps are always running when the vehicle is charging, so it will be able to keep that charging unit cool. But don't do it all the time. Charging with a generator all the time will cause issues with your onboard charger if you do it regularly. It's something you do in a pinch if you have to. Now, if you're going to use a generator to charge your electric vehicle, you have to understand one thing about how they're set up. If I was to use my EcoFlow inverter, I actually cannot charge my electric vehicle from it. To do that, I have to get something called a bonding plug, because the only way you can charge an electric car is if you have a bonded neutral. To think about this, when you look inside your electrical panel in your home, I'm not sure if any of you have done that, but the fact is the white wire comes in and it plugs into a bus bar inside that electrical panel. And so does the copper ground wire, the earth ground wire. And so that means that they are actually bonded inside that panel. Both the white wire and the copper wire actually have a physical connection through the electrical box. That's what's known as a bonded neutral. It means that it's bonded to earth ground. So the electric car actually has a setup in its charger and the onboard charger of the vehicle that detects this bonded neutral and says it's okay to charge. What it basically is saying is that it has a safe connection to the house, and that if anything was to go wrong, the earth ground is there to prevent any issues. Now, with a generator, there are generators with a bonded neutral and without a bonded neutral. But if you have a generator without a bonded neutral, there are tutorials online on how you can set up your generator to have a bonded neutral. Now, I'll do a video on this later. I'll need an electrician to explain the bonded neutral part of it in more detail. But I have tested my generator on our Hyundai Kona electric, and it does charge it at the full 7.2 kilowatts, no problem. Because it turns out that the Furman generator that I bought from Costco has a bonded neutral and charges it just fine. But we also plugged in the EcoFlow inverter, which does not have a bonded neutral, and it would not charge the vehicle. So to make an EcoFlow inverter or something like that work, you have to put a bonded plug in it in order to trick the car into charging from that product. Now, this will always lead to issues with earth grounding. So that's why you have to only do this once in a while, in a pinch. So for example, when I said that EVs can run on all types of fuel, imagine if your generator ran on natural gas, or if your generator runs on propane, and most of the time they run on gasoline. So that means just with those three fuels alone, I can run it on all three types of fossil fuels if I need to in a pinch. So I could run it on propane, which as we know is cleaner than gasoline. So I would have a propane powered electric vehicle over that nighttime period, which is, it's really nice in a pinch. You get some backup. You can also charge your electric vehicle on renewable sources like wind and solar. For example, if you have a whole bunch of solar panels on your roof, let's say you have a 10 kilowatt array on your roof and you have inverters feeding your house. There are systems out there, smart EVSEs or level 2 chargers can actually regulate the charge that goes to your electric vehicle to make sure that you're only charging on renewable sources. You can use your solar specifically to charge your car at times of the day when the sun is out and when it's bright. Now, most people aren't home at this time of day, so you end up feeding off to the grid. But there are systems out there also. If you don't have solar, you can get a smart EVSE that will actually monitor the type of power the grid is using and charge your electric vehicle using the greenest energy available. Like for example, here in Ontario, in Canada, we have hydropower, we have nuclear power, we have gas power, and maybe a couple others in the mix. We also have solar and wind in there as well. So you can choose times on the grid when solar, wind, and hydro are very high, or nuclear, wind, solar are high, or just times when gas-fired plants are not on. So you can actually use greener energy in your electric car just using clever software programming. And I think this is where we need to go for the future. We need to have more connected systems because the grid is overworked. If you talk to people in the hydro industry or the electricity industry in other parts of the world, it's funny. Other parts of the world think it's funny when we call it hydro, but here in Ontario, we're very used to most of our power coming from hydro, so we call it hydro. So these grid-connected systems will definitely be able to help alleviate brownouts in the future because you'll be able to regulate when those electric cars are charging on the grid, and you won't need such a large amount of power producing capabilities if we use technologies like this in the future. We can lower the charge rates of electric cars using smart EVSEs, and we can stagger them across the night so that not all the cars are charging at the same time. If they're able to talk to each other, it'll be very handy. Everybody plugs their car in all at once, and then the software regulates when they take the power. You don't need as robust of an electric grid. And the fact is, most electric cars charge at night. Only, I'm going to throw a number up there. Let's just say 20% of them charge during the day and 80% of them charge at night. It's just a thought I had in my head, so I'll just put it out there. So to wrap up my thoughts on this subject, you can charge your car with a generator. If it has a bonded neutral, it'll get you out of a pinch. And the fact is, electric vehicles can run on any fuel that you throw at them. It is very, very easy to convert other fuels into electricity. It's not something you can do with your average diesel or gas-powered vehicle. They must run on one type of fuel, so they have to be refined and made into that specific type of fuel. An electric vehicle, it doesn't really care. It would prefer a good sine wave if you want your onboard charger to last a really long time, but the fact is it's there in a pinch. The electrical grid is going to get better through software. We're going to be able to tie things together and be able to regulate where the power goes. We are going to have a robust power grid in the future when near 100% of vehicles become electric, or as they're shared with hydrogen, because you still need electricity to split the water into the hydrogen and oxygen in order to create the fuel for a hydrogen-powered future. But the hydrogen power would also be done during parts of the night or when solar is very relevant in the system, and these reformers will also be set up to use power at certain times of the day when it's better use of the electricity. And that brings us to the end of the podcast for this week. I hope you enjoyed this. And again, come check out our YouTube page if you're not on the YouTube page right now. The video version of this podcast is there. It's also available on Spotify if you just want to listen in your car. And if you found this podcast helpful, or if you had any comments, please leave your comments down below. I always discuss some pretty interesting subjects during the week, and I want to know your opinion on them. And then I can add that to the next podcast for next time, and we can have a discussion together. But if you found this helpful, maybe like our video and subscribe to the channel and see what we're doing next.